Okay, hello and welcome to our audience members joining us from across the globe. I'm Raymond Karam, the Chief Program and Development Officer here at the Arab Gulf States Institute. We're happy to have you all with us today as we host a discussion assessing the Trump administration's military response to the Houthis and the overall U.S. policy toward the group and toward Yemen more broadly. And we have with us a truly exceptional panel of experts. I'll introduce them very briefly here and add a link to their full bios in the chat. First, I'd like to welcome Mr. Mutea Dammaj. He served as the Secretary General of the Cabinet of Yemen from 2021 to 2024, where he led crisis management efforts and coordinated key government policies during a critical period of national instability. Prior to that, he was a senior political advisor to the Prime Minister of Yemen from 2018 to 2021, advising on governance, negotiation strategy, and interagency coordination. Also, warm welcome to Michael Knights. He is the Jill and J. Bernstein Senior Fellow at the Washington Institute, specializing in the military and security affairs of Iraq, Iran, Yemen, and the Gulf Arab states. He regularly briefs U.S. government policymakers, congressional committees, and U.S. military officers on regional security affairs, and has worked extensively with local military and security agencies on the ground. His last book, 25 Days to Aden, The Unknown Story of Arabian Elite Forces at War, was published in 2023. Another warm welcome to Shurooq al-Qasemi, a Yemeni human rights advocate with a background in international law and journalism. She previously served as a visiting professional at the Office of the Prosecutor at the International Criminal Court in The Hague. Her work focuses on justice, accountability, and how Yemenis engage with power and representation in times of crisis. Last but not least is my colleague Hamzah al-Kamali. He is a visiting fellow at AGSI, where his research focuses on Yemen and the evolving security dynamics of the Red Sea region. He currently also serves as Yemen's Deputy Minister of Youth and Sports, where he has led national initiatives in policy design, strategic planning, and international cooperation. With over 13 years of experience in public governance, he has played a leading role in Yemen's post-conflict development and national dialogue processes. And I should note that Hamzah has had a critical role in pulling this panel together. So thank you very much, Hamzah, for all your work leading up to this. Moderating the session is Gregory Johnsen. He is a non-resident fellow here with us at AGSI. He is the author of The Last Refuge, Yemen, Al-Qaeda, and America's War in Arabia, which has been translated into multiple languages. From 2016 to 2018, he served on the Yemen panel of experts for the United Nations Security Council. And with that, Greg, over to you.
Thank you very much, Raymond, and thanks to everyone for joining us here today. As Raymond mentioned, please do put any comments that come up during our discussion into the chat function. I'll be moderating those. I'll be turning them over to our panelists. We're going to have a little bit of a discussion, and then we'll bring in a lot of your questions. Obviously, a lot, as Raymond said, has been happening in Yemen. The U.S. had started a bombing campaign called Operation Rough Rider on March 15th. That came to an end on May 6th. And so what I want to do initially is, Hamzah, turn it over to you. And if you could sort of level set us for our discussion today, walk us through what happened in that campaign, anything that we need to know going back further in history in order for everyone to be sort of on the same page as we start our discussion of Yemen, what happened and what's next.
Thank you, Greg, and thank for Raymond and for the Institute for hosting those distinguished guests to discuss Yemen in a timely manner when Yemen is becoming a very critical file here in DC and around the globe when it comes to international security. As everybody has followed the news, Yemen, United States has launched an air campaign since 15th of March to target and dismantle the Houthis' capabilities and preventing them from attacking ships and under the title of freedom of navigation. And these attacks on air campaign has targeted mainly Houthis' missile launch capabilities and also technical telecommunications sets, as well as to the other key Houthi leaders who were involved in launching those missiles, as well as the command structure. This air campaign has resulted in some sort of preventing the Houthis from expanding their attacks more, as the per United States statements, and it helped in preventing technical stuff that works mainly on launching these missiles from attacking the ships, according to them. But those attacks has continue. The results wasn't really significant. It has led to some, I would say, some effect on the Houthis, but the impact wasn't enough to stop them from attacking ships. But to be honest, this like campaign has started as one of the priorities that President Trump has said, that he wants to restore freedom of navigation and to gain control by force and to stop the Houthis from this, because they were the last decision that President Trump has done in his first term was to designate the Houthis as foreign terrorist organization, and as well, we all have followed, seen that. But to be honest, Yemen is not the case. That didn't start at 15th of March. The crisis in Yemen started mainly at September 2014, when Houthis took over the capital Sana'a and control the capital and start to move towards the southern part of Yemen to Aden and to control other governorates. This forced the Saudi Arabia to launch a coalition called the Saudi-led coalition, which is under the title of restoring the legitimate government to the capital Sana'a. The conflict between the Houthis and the Saudi Arabia, and with the support of the government, has stayed for more than 10 years until 2022, when the Saudi Arabia, with the government, has reached a ceasefire with the Houthis. And since then, Houthis stopped attacking cross-border attacks on the Saudi Arabia, and some easement for like restrictions that has been imposed on the Houthis by the Saudis has been halted for that moment. But since this have all changed after October the 7th, when Houthis started on November 2023 to attack Israel and attack trade ships across the Arab Gulf and across the Strait of Bab el-Mandeb. And this has led to, first, as said before, a minor air campaign by President Biden administration with the help of the United Kingdom. But unfortunately, these attacks also didn't lead to any, I would say, any achievements, and Houthis continue their attacks. And as we see now, there is like unclear policy towards Yemen, towards the Houthis, and all of the attacks has fell short and led to no result.
Thank you very much, Hamzah. I think that's a great overview to get us started, talking about the different waves of attacks, what the Biden administration had launched, what the Trump administration decided to do, and then even going back further in history and talking about the Houthi coup in September of 2014 and how they've taken over the northern part of the country. Mutea, I want to turn to you now. Hamzah talked a little bit about some of these strikes. The U.S. said in basically 52 days of airstrikes from March 15th to about May 5th of 2025, the U.S. carried out over 1,100 strikes, targeted a number of Houthi facilities, killed a number of Houthi leaders. If you can, in a couple of minutes, can you give us a sort of a battle damage assessment or an overview of what the U.S. actually did over this 52 days of bombing? How much damage did the United States do to the Houthis?
Hello, I'm happy to be with you in this discussion. But let me say, no doubt, what the United States did in this last campaign was effective, has a great impact on Houthis and on the crisis of Yemen itself. But let me just clarify one thing. What the United States did now, from starting the airstrike until suspension, is a part of a wider and coherent strategy of America in Yemen, at least since the start of the war in September 2014. And I think it's also a part of the confusion of the strategy of the United States against Iran and its totalitarian regime and its destructive project in the area, and those ideological militia groups backed by Iran, at least since in the last decade. So we see what the United States did, but it doesn't seem like have a very or a clear strategy that enable us to understand what's supposed to be done, especially when we see Yemen. For the United States, the nature of the interest of the United States, the nature of interest of the international is really permanent and important, not for this year, not just because what's happening in the in the Red Sea, but because of the important geostrategic location of Yemen itself and the role that can play in the area. But if we are talking about what happened in this last campaign, we should say the most important thing happened in this campaign is breaking with the a vague roadmap that was about to enable Houthis to keep what they have through their coup and give them the time and the space they need to improve their missile system and their drones system. And by the end, it means they that road map and the suspension of this war acknowledge that the Red Sea is under the control of Iran and the Houthis, because they will start and do always what they are going to do right now. But the first thing happened from that, we can say the roadmap as it was declared in 2023 is apart from the past. This is one of the most insignificant impact of this campaign. The second one, and I think this thing we should focus on. The Houthis for years, like Hezbollah once did, they thought they have a great intelligence. No one can discover their backbone, and no one can reach the important places for the command leaders, for the camps of their armies. But what happened in this, and I think this what make the Houthis run to have this truce, if we can say it like that, is they find themselves exposed, and everything they think they hide, it's open and it can be targeted and have a huge damage. This is the reason why the Houthis accept to go and run to have this settlement, this truce, to rebuild their own backbone, to hide what they think they built in 10 years, but it was all under the eye of the United States. And every time the United States was targeting the Houthis, they didn't just target a camp that all of us, we know where it is, but they target a very sensitive targets. The third one, it is, I mean, a thing we read through the Army of the United States, and it is not the thing we listen from the politician in Washington. What we heard from politicians in Washington, they do not care about the inner war of Yemen. They will focus just in the threat that to the Red Sea and the navigation. But when we see the campaign of the United States, we see a different thing. There were a lot of and important and effective airstrikes that targeted a very strategic positions in the inner war in Yemen, like what we see in Ma'rib, what we see in Al-Balaq, in Mas, in Majaz, which is playing a huge or a very important role in the inner war between the government and the terrorist group of Houthis. And that was a message. We read it, the people read it, and this is also one of the most important thing happened, how the people in the area of Houthis react toward what in that campaign. It's obvious people were happy. They never say they are against that campaigns or airstrike against Houthis, and that encourage the people, the people which are suffering, from the unpaid wages, from the oppression that Houthi is using against them every day, that will help people to rebel, to resist what is Houthi is doing. And I think the campaign of the United States gave people hope. They can defeat Houthis, and the world will treat Houthis as should be treated in the last 10 years. The suspension is something different. Even all these benefits that we can hear, but the suspension give the wrong message. But for us, for the government, for the people, they are now free. They can rebuild their uh, power to reach their own sorry.
Well, Mutea, let me pause you just there for a moment, and let me turn to Michael. So, Michael, we heard Mutea talk about the Red Sea being sort of under control of the Houthis, under control of an Iranian proxy, I think is how he phrased it. When the United States started this bombing campaign in March, President Trump was very clear that the U.S. had one goal. That was to restore freedom of navigation in the Red Sea. Now, we had 52 days of bombing. I think just today we saw the Houthis announce that they were going to carry out a naval blockade of Haifa. Whether or not that's within their capacities or not, I think remains to be seen. But my question to you, Michael, is very simple and I think very basic and a good place to start, which is, did the United States accomplish what it set out to accomplish in restoring freedom of navigation to the Red Sea?
Thanks, Greg, and thanks to everyone else for having me here. You hear me okay? Okay. So, look, I mean, this was a very confused US operation, which is really weird when you think about the fact that this is the largest US air operation since the end of the counter-ISIS, war in 2014 through 2017-ish. This operation began, I don't think it did begin to restore freedom of navigation because we hadn't had an attack on commercial shipping since November of 2024. So it's a bit weird in March of 2025 to start a military operation to restore something that already exists at that moment. What we seemed to be doing was warning the Houthis against restarting attacks on Israeli-linked shipping going through the Red Sea if the Gaza ceasefire broke down. And I think the US was also pretty annoyed at the number of Predator drones or sized drones that were being shot down by the Houthis, which in fact only got worse during the operation. So, we ended up on May 6th agreeing to end our operations because things were exactly the way they were before the first day of the offensive. And that indicates that you have not really achieved any coherent goal in the course of an operation. That's the largest we've seen in 8 years of US military operations since the end of counter-ISIS. That's a little bit odd. And I think it indicates that the decision-making was a bit impulsive in March. It might have sent some side messages to the Iranians about the need to re-enter negotiations. But that's all it did. I mean, it did some mowing of the grass inside, the Houthi movement in terms of taking out some military facilities. But we have very little ability to gauge how effective that was because so much of it was underground and we have no way to gauge what was in those tunnels ultimately. One thing I would say is that this was big by the standards of the US today, but it wasn't even big by the standards of counter-ISIS. This was effectively like 1 week of the Battle of Mosul, which went on for 10 months. So it was large by Yemen and US standards, but low by global standards. We didn't hit any senior Houthi leaders. We couldn't find them. And, it's going to take a lot more effort for either us or the Israelis at some point in the future to target Houthi leaders. And I don't think that would change their motivations. Likewise, we never really credibly threatened a ground offensive. I think that was mostly self-generated by Yemenis, which did have the useful impact of making the Houthis paranoid, but I don't think, from what I can tell, anyone ever seriously considered providing air support to a ground offensive or approving that ground offensive. And that's because the Saudis are in charge and they basically don't want a ground offensive. And the US is now even more tightly tied to what the Saudis do in Yemen. And we, in a sense, I think, have handed Yemen off completely now to Saudi management. And that's, that's going to indicate that there's going to be less chance of escalation and more chance of negotiation with the Houthis. It seems as if there's some improved interdiction of Houthi resupply in the offshore areas of the Red Sea, which is good. That's some US train and equip, advise and assist going on there. Perhaps the Omani border could be more tightly controlled. And as a result, perhaps we can reduce the amount of resupply that the Iranians put into these areas. But from my perspective, the US didn't know what it was trying to achieve when it went in, except maybe stop shooting at our drones. And the US learned that it would take a lot more than 50 days to wear down the Houthis. It would require a ground offensive by Yemeni forces backed by the US, and that the US did not have the appetite to do those things. And that instead we want the Saudis to run the Yemen file. It's sad for me personally. It's not the outcome I wanted to see. But I think in reality, that's where we are. And I think a lot of Yemeni people are sad about that, and they don't seem to be able to quite accept it yet. But that seems to be the reality. Over.
Thanks, Michael. I want to ask one quick follow-up before I turn to Shurooq and sort of broaden our conversation a little bit. And the follow-up is this. Given what you said about sort of an odd campaign, an impulsive decision to start the bombing campaign, is this simply round one that we saw these past 52 days of bombing? Or is this the end and we can all sort of go back to forgetting about Yemen and the Houthis and what's happening there, at least from a U.S. perspective? And we'll talk about sort of the U.S. handing off the Yemen file to the Saudis later. But is this sort of round one, or is this the end of the conflict between the United States and the Houthis?
Well, I know that you and I won't forget Yemen, Greg, but a lot of folks in Washington will be quite keen. Particularly within the military, within the Pentagon, within the Navy. Yemen is not something they needed to be doing right now, and they will be happy to hand it off to the Saudis, perhaps along with some other things. Syria. I think what we just saw happen in Riyadh was very much a kind of handing off of a portfolio, to the regional manager. And so I think that many people will be happy about that. I do think that there's going to be a resurgence at some point in the future of military operations against the Houthis, involving at least the Yemenis and some Gulf states, and possibly including US and international players as well. Because, they've learned that they can get what they want by threatening. So in July of 2024, when they were threatening economic warfare against the Houthis, and it was starting to be effective, what do the Houthis do? They threaten Riyadh. In this current conflict, if we had pushed the Houthis hard enough, if the US had, they would have ended up striking Saudi Arabia or the UAE or both. And, the problem is that our Gulf partners are too concerned about Houthi strikes to probably allow the Yemeni forces to defeat the Houthis. And that's the basic reality that we've got. So in a few years' time, a couple of things are going to happen. One, the Houthis are going to ask for something that nobody can give them. They're going to push it too far. Or they're going to get involved in a US-Iran and Israel-Iran meltdown. And secondly, maybe by that stage, the Gulf states have strong enough counter-missile defenses, particularly counter-ballistic missile, that they say, we're willing to call the Houthis bluff now, and you can't have that thing that you want. But that's not going to be for a couple of years. Over.
Thank you very much for that, Michael. I'm going to come back to both Mutea and Hamzah to pull on one of those strings. But before I do, Shurooq, I want to bring you into the conversation. We focused very narrowly so far in our first 15, 20 minutes on sort of the political, the military aspect. But obviously, there's a humanitarian crisis going on in Yemen. Just this weekend, Nicholas Kristof, a columnist for the New York Times, wrote that the U.S. had just wasted $7 billion on a country that many people in the United States couldn't even find on a map, while at the same time, that's $7 billion sort of on the military side, while cutting aid to Yemen. And one of the points that Nicholas Kristof made in his column is that cutting the aid from the United States into the humanitarian programs in Yemen actually allows the Houthis to sort of consolidate their grip on power. So I want to ask you sort of a two-part question. The first part is Mr. Kristof right in that the U.S. cutting aid will allow the Houthis to actually become stronger? And then if you could give us sort of an overview of the humanitarian situation on the ground there in Yemen and what the Houthis are dealing with, particularly in the north and in
Thank you so much, Greg. I think your voice was cut off, but I heard the question. First, thank you so much for dedicating this time to Yemen, especially when it reaches this usual cycle of fading. It's either we're emergency and everyone is talking about us, or we're just fading. So thank you so much for that. But yeah, he is absolutely right, and I will get to that point later. But first, frankly, I don't think anyone can fully grasp, let alone describe in detail, just how dire the humanitarian and human rights situation in Yemen, especially in areas controlled by the Houthis. To start, while we're in the topic, the civilian toll of recent US airstrikes remains unclear. Since March, we've only seen rough estimates. What is clear, however, is that civilians are being killed and injured at an alarming rate. And yet, the only confirmed incidents of civilians' casualties came to light just because the Houthis chose to release videos of the aftermath of them, such as the US airstrike on April 28th that had a detention facility holding migrants in Sahda. As always, the Houthis manipulate information, what gets released and when, only when it serves their narrative of resistance and victimhood. But beyond that, the humanitarian space in itself is collapsing. Humanitarian agencies face growing access restrictions, especially in Houthi-controlled areas. Aid deliveries are blocked at checkpoints, rerouted, taxed, or outright looted. This is not incidental. This is a strategy. And since day one, the Houthis have long used food and basic services as tools of control and warfare. And we all must remember that after years of conflict and unlimited crisis, an estimate 19.5 million people, over half the population, are dependent on aid in Yemen. Yemen has the fifth largest displacement crisis globally, with an estimate of 40.8 million internally displaced people, most of them, women and children. At the same time, they are Houthis continuously dismantling civil society. We all heard about the latest arrests of UN humanitarian staff, especially women. And this is part of much larger campaign of repression. What we're seeing now is the latest escalation of ongoing pattern of arbitrary detention and forced disappearance, targeting not only Yemeni activists or politicians. This includes aid workers, journalists, and even migrants. And here I must highlight something just very sure, that there is a racialized abuse happening in Yemen. Thousands of African migrants, mainly Ethiopian and Somali, are held in unsafe, overcrowded detention centers with no legal processes. And Greg, some have been forcibly recruited. And this answers your question, because aid is not only for Yemeni people. Others have died. And the April 28th airstrike was not the first strategy that is tied to detention centers. And it is likely won't be the last one as long as Houthis remain in control. Meanwhile, the Houthis have escalated also their gender-based violence, ranging from online censorship to actual rape and torture in their detention facilities. To answer your other question on the US side, I must say that policy decisions like designating the Houthis as a foreign terrorist organization or suspending aid, which might be aiming to weakening the Houthis, rightly so, but without broader strategy. Those moves often end up hurting civilians most. When there is no parallel humanitarian plan, civilians are left even more exposed to hunger, to violence, and to recruitment. Over the last 5 years, during President Trump's first term and Biden's, they've been Yemen's largest donor, providing more than $760 million. Compromising this, it compromised the whole, the coordination of the whole humanitarian response plan. Again, what we're seeing here is a pattern, whether it's from the Houthis violations or US policies. Security-only policies create space for armed groups such as Houthis to thrive. Only civilians who will end up paying the price. So any serious conversation about Yemen must go beyond the tactical assessments and because let's be honest, Yemeni civilians are trapped. They have the Houthis here, and these impulsive decisions, as Michael described them, and at the end, civilians are the weakest in this vicious cycle, and they're trapped. I'll leave it here, and maybe if you guys have questions.
Yeah, no, thank you, Shurooq. I want to ask a follow-up on that, and then turn back to Hamzah and Mutea. And the follow-up is this: I think many people in Washington often feel quite frustrated in the sense that, okay, sending humanitarian aid into the country, as you rightly pointed out, the Houthis have in many ways weaponized this aid and are just using it to further their own control in Yemen. So the U.S. find itself in sort of a damned if we do, damned if we don't, in that if you send in humanitarian aid, the Houthis can manipulate it, use it to strengthen their hold on power. If you pull or cut off humanitarian aid that's going into the country, then you have civilians who turn to the Houthis as sort of their only hope for salvation and in order to avoid starvation. So and I think you critique the U.S. military approach. What other tools does the U.S. have in its toolbox besides sort of just a bombing campaign or cutting off humanitarian aid? In other words, what else can the U.S. do to bring about a better situation in Yemen, both for civilians, but also on sort of the geopolitical stage as well?
I'm sorry, Greg, but those who complain and the simplest answer are just lazy. The answers are there. We have a legitimate government since day one of Houthis' control of Sana'a. They have said it repeatedly. Go to Aden. We will coordinate humanitarian response. And also, this is the thing, Yemen's situation is not a traditional conflict where there is this part and that part, and having this one shape of strategy with everyone, with everything at the same time is not working. You have a legitimate government that is cooperating with you in every other place. You have even other armed groups who are not as aggressive and as the Houthis. So I'm sorry, this is just laziness. People, they really don't care about Yemeni civilians. And I must say, I'm scared because with news circulating about Trump dismantling the Pentagon specific unit about civilians. I don't know what it was called, but there is a specific unit that is concerned with minimizing civilians, and it just there is not a lot that aspire trust. And as Mutea said, a lot of Yemenis were, even though they don't have the space to express how they've long waited for the salvation to come to someone to put Houthis back in their place. They're disappointed because first you come and we've spent weeks not having answers, looking for answers, looking between double messaging, and then the moment we think, okay, there is something happening, they're only targeting military bases, they're targeting high level, then it's gone and people don't know why or where. It's so sad that it's beyond that. I mean, it's not only that our agency as country is no longer there. We don't make decisions. It's also we're not even respected to be informed. Not the government, not the civilians. And it's just sad.
So just to sum up, if I could, your answer basically for the U.S. is support much more the internationally recognized government of Yemen, and that will take care of sort of the humanitarian situation.
Oh,
and
100%.
or at least help. Okay.
And just one last thing,
Yes,
Greg.
please.
All of this one day, I mean, just like the Americans or the Saudis, there will come a moment they will decide we want out of this country. What we have is country institutions that they can support and they will always be there in short and long term capacity building, and a substantive one, not a showcase ones, as a substantive capacity building to our people or institutions is the answer. All countries one day they have their exit, but this is our country and this will always be there to benefit us in short and long term. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Shurooq. I want to turn to Hamzah and then to Mutea very quickly. So just in a sort of a minute or two, we've sort of talked and we've painted a pretty depressing picture about the situation in Yemen. The U.S. is, I think Michael described it, the odd decision to begin the bombing campaign. Shurooq has laid out for us a very dire humanitarian situation there on the ground. Hamzah, you yourself talked about the roots of this going back to the Houthi takeover in Sana'a in 2014. And what we've seen over the past decade is basically the Houthis getting stronger and stronger, being able to present a threat first to sort of the internationally recognized government and then more regionally, and now becoming involved in a direct conflict with the United States and with Israel as well. And what we saw with the sort of peace deal, the truce, the ceasefire, however we want to describe it, that President Trump announced on May 6th, was not so much the Houthis being forced to stop attacking ships in the Red Sea, but rather the Houthis agreeing to stop attacking American flag ships in the Red Sea. And that's a little bit different than it seems what the United States set out in the beginning to do, which was to, I think President Trump said, completely annihilate the Houthis. Perhaps that's a bit of a bit of exaggeration. And then there's also, I think, the idea that the Houthis could restart this campaign at any time that they wanted. And so my question first to you, Hamzah, and then to Mutea is, do the Houthis need to be defeated in order to remove the threat to commercial shipping in the Red Sea? Or is it enough simply to make an agreement and we can trust the Houthis to uphold their part of the bargain? Does the United States, the internationally recognized government of Yemen, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, do they just need to defeat and uproot the Houthis in order to remove this threat? Or is it something that the U.S. and its partners can manage going forward?
Thank you so much for this great question, Greg, and for the input from all of the speakers. Well, first of all, we need to know, what does the United States want from Yemen? Unfortunately, the United States has no policy towards Yemen. Yemen is a secondary file of other countries in the region. But to be honest, this is, I would say, a lack of assessment Houthis started in Sada as a small group, as a local threat in 2004, which at that time, the United States and some countries believed that this is a way, because Ali Abdullah Saleh wasn't democratically enough, good person, this is a manifestation of his failure. Then they took over Sana'a with the help and support of Iranians in 2014. They became a national threat, from local to national threat. Then they moved to Aden with the ignorance of the United States, and they became a regional threat. Saudis has no option. They launched an operation to stop the Houthis and support the government, but they were not enough supported by the government of the United States, and they were left alone. Saudis and Emiratis specifically, they were left alone. Houthis kept, I would say, consuming the Saudi Arabia, and the Saudi Arabia was blackmailed by the international community, who believe that Houthis are minority and we should not get rid of them, in this stupid sentiment, I would say. Then when October the 7th happened, Houthis start attacking the ships, and they discovered that Houthi is a problem right now. Houthi is a headache. He can be dangerous. He can be, I would say, lethal. He turned from this local, national, regional to international threat. And this lack of assessment of the Houthis will lead them, because they are jihadists, they are radical, and they have the ideology, will make them, and they have the desire to expand. We've seen them, Greg, expanding to Somalia, helping the Shabab with medium-range ballistic missiles, having connections in Iraq, have connections also in some areas in Saudi Arabia and Qatif. They are an international threat. Tomorrow, Houthis will make their own jihadist groups and will attack Western capitals. Why? Because you did not get rid of the risk. The problem is not in the sea. The problem is in the land. The problem is the Houthi military capability, not the actions. The actions are reflections of their capabilities. Nobody can convince anyone, especially for the Yemenis, that just stopping the attacks will be the answer. No, this is not. And when I see the United States foreign policy towards Yemen, and you see this, I would say, radical shift between administrations. The last thing that President Trump do during his first term was designation of the Houthi. The first thing as a foreign policy Biden did was delisting the Houthis. Then he add them to the terrorist group. Then Trump came with this idea, and I think this is the main motive behind this air campaign. I'm better than Biden. And he wanted to prove that he's better than Biden. Biden did his delisting of the Houthi as anti-Trump strategy. Well, Trump had no strategy, and you are doing an anti-strategy for no strategy, and you leave us in chaos. And I think this is a major problem for Yemen, because they don't observe Yemen as a problem, and they think that they are so busy. We have seen the Secretary of Defense statement yesterday. We have many, many big problems. But when it comes to reality, Yemen is a threat, is a risk for them, for their allies, and for the region. And if they don't take Yemen seriously, if they don't build the policy, and I believe that this shifting between the administration policies makes America untrustworthy. That's why I believe United States should lead strategy by institutions. Institutions like Department of Defense, Department of the State should build the strategy, and administration should, of course, have the final say, but they should have a strategy. They shouldn't have a day-to-day tactics, because this is will be backfire, they will consume them. They spend $6 billion, and nobody knows with this time is with the excuse of Gaza. Tomorrow they will have a new excuse, and as we go on, they will find something to do. They have to dismantle Houthis' capabilities. We don't want to kill all the Houthis. We want the Houthis to become a group that doesn't believe in violence, that doesn't have a military capability, that can be engaged with the Yemeni community.
So, Hamzah, I hear that, and that's what we want, the Houthis to be engaged politically and so forth. But you also described them earlier in your remarks as jihadists. And so if I'm hearing you, correct me, and please correct me if I'm not, the Houthis are going to continue to be a threat, both domestically for the region and even internationally, unless they are compelled and forced to the negotiating table to sign some sort of an agreement that, unlike in the past, they actually adhere to. Is that Is that an accurate summation of your remarks, that they have to be defeated?
I want to remark something very important that Mr. Mutea has said, which is Houthis accepted ceasefire, not only because of the Iranian pressure on them, but because they believed at certain point they start to lose big. You've seen that, Greg, in Hodeidah. You've seen that before when they failed to control all over Marib, and you've seen it everywhere. Peace is a tactic for the Houthi. It's not a strategy. They use peace, they use negotiation as a way to get over the conflict. I believe that Houthis will keep fighting. Houthis will live in war unless they are dismantled military. And there is only one option for that. And I have seen that. I have been in discussions here in DC and everywhere. Yemen should have a cost-effective strategy when it comes to military. You don't need boots on the ground. Shurooq has just said, support the people who, there are many factions, and this is, I would say lack of assessment when it comes. They believe that there are nobody who's going to fight the Houthis. There are fighters. People have been fighting the Houthis before the US involvement, before the Saudi involvement, and they will keep fighting the Houthis. The main good thing about this government is that it keeps the conflict between state and non-state. If the state is gone, people will keep fighting the Houthis. Maybe people will become more extreme, and it will become a bigger problem for the United States. That's why keeping the title of this government as the state institution that fights the Houthi will keep even the conflict in its, I would say, right shape.
Thank you for that. Mutea, let me turn to you now. And earlier we heard Michael sort of compare what the United States did in Yemen over these 50 days to the anti-ISIS campaign that the U.S. carried out in Iraq and Syria. Obviously, in that campaign, the U.S. largely provided air power, but there was a contingent on the ground, the SDF, that was fighting ISIS on the ground. And so my question to you is two parts. One, the same question as with Hamzah. Do the Houthis need to be defeated in order to remove this threat? And then, Michael, I'll come to you with sort of the follow-up question to that. And then second, if that is the case, does the U.S. need to implement sort of a counter-ISIS campaign? That is, the U.S. provides air cover while troops on the ground, local Yemeni forces, similar to the SDF as they fought ISIS. Is that sort of the solution to this problem? So first, do the Houthis need to be defeated to remove this threat? And if the answer to that is yes, what is the U.S. approach, and how does the U.S. help bring this about?
Let me just say a simple truth. Since April 2022, the truth, Houthi have developed missile system, drone system that can threaten navigation in regional countries. But notice, during the same period, the Houthi have tried and attempted thousands of times to attack the government areas and have failed to achieve any military success. This is a thing people cannot see it, but we in Yemen see it clearly. When it is about the ability of Houthis to hurt the regional countries and to disturb or threaten the navigation, yes, they have developed strong system. But when it is about the fight between the government and the Houthis, nothing changed. And I should say, in these 3 years, we are becoming stronger than before. We are able to have this war. And when we are talking about what we should do to stop what the Houthi is doing, to not just the navigation and the regional countries, but to Yemenis before all, to the people that are suffering and dying from the hunger, from the oppression all over the Yemen. We should know. Houthi should be defeated completely. I will not talk in a very gentle way, but we should deal with the terrorist group as we are dealing with the terrorist group. When you are talking about the Houthis, you should also remember what you can do with the Qaeda and what you did with the Daesh. I mean, this is the only solution for Yemen. The only way to defeat terrorists is to enable the legitimate government to take over every single city of Yemen. the government should be responsible for every place. You cannot fight from the airstrike and you think you will defeat Houthis in that way. This is the first thing. The second thing, it's also about the United States. The United States should see an ally in this ground. You can destroy things when you have airstrike, but you cannot build stability or security without having great ally on the earth that can manage and govern these areas. And for decades, Yemen was a great friend for the United States, for the international community, and for at least the last 60 years, when after the revolution of Yemen in 1962, we are talking about the government that know how to respect the interest of the international in the area and to follow the international law. No hope to defeat Houthis soon, but by obvious coalition between the international community and the government of Yemen. But for us as Yemenis, we know this is our war, and we will have it now or tomorrow or the next month. And we know we are, because we need this relation with our regional partners, with the international community. We accept for at least since 2022 to have this war in the way the international wanted. So what I said first, the first thing happened in this campaign, we are free now from the obligation that was forced on Yemeni people, on Yemeni government, because the interest of the international community and the regional community in Yemen.
Thank you for that. I want to remind our audience just to continue to put your questions into the chat, and we'll handle those as they come in. Michael, I think you wanted to address sort of whether the Houthis needed to be defeated in order to remove this threat and the open-ended nature of the threat.
Thanks, Greg. Yeah, it was like a two-finger, but there's a couple of responses to the great comments by our Yemeni panelists, who can put this stuff way better than I can. I just say first thing, I think it's Mutea's absolutely right that the Houthis are stronger outside Yemen than they are in Yemen. Their power increasingly comes from their ability to hold assets outside at risk. And what that's doing is turning the international community, including Saudi Arabia, into protection for the Houthis. That's the sad thing, is that, the Houthis could be toppled and Yemen could be stabilized and the threat to shipping could be gone. But the Houthis' ability to do one or two strikes on a place like Riyadh or Abu Dhabi or even international shipping is giving them protection. And that is pure and simple terrorism. That is extortion and terrorism. And we're sort of letting it happen. The second thing I wanted to say is that, and this is the real two-finger, if you look at August of 2023, months before October 7, we could see the Houthis beginning to prepare for an anti-shipping campaign. And that anti-shipping campaign on the Red Sea coast, the preparation of their attack boats, their attempts to practice seizing ships, was linked to US-Iran tensions in the Gulf and the fact that the US and Iran were seizing each other's oil shipments. I think that's what's going to happen again at some point. When we get max pressure 2.0, which will almost certainly happen when the US-Iran talks break down, and we get UN snapback, and we get another major military crisis involving Iran, the Houthis are going to activate as part of Iran's extended deterrence system. They've effectively replaced Lebanese Hezbollah. And I think in many ways they're more important. And so, we are going to be back in the point where the Houthis attack shipping again, as you said, for a different reason. The final thing I'd say is I agree also completely that you need ground forces and air forces create a lot of synergy when you mix them together. In the counter-ISIS fight, the primary effect of the SDF in Syria or the Iraqi forces in Iraq was often to uncover the Islamic State forces, because as we did a ground offensive, the Islamic State forces had to move, communicate, and show themselves to be military, not civilian. And that meant our air power was a ton more effective. Without that, in this current struggle, we've lacked a lot of the capability their air power could bring to bear. Just as Trump did the kind of ceasefire agreement, I was about to release an op-ed about how you could use even very, very simple ground offensives, not even coordinated with the US, just happening independently of the US. And it would open up a lot of targets for US air power if that happened, and it would make it more effective. Unfortunately, that very day, that's when the ceasefire happened, and I threw that op-ed on the spike. But one day it might be relevant again. Over.
Well, Michael, let me follow up on that point and then turn to Shurooq. But on that point, the U.S. carried out attacks for 52 days. How long do we need in order to get a ground offensive that actually starts? The U.S. was carrying out massive number of strikes, 1,100 strikes, according to CENTCOM. How many days did the U.S. air campaign need to go on in order for a ground campaign to start? And I think embedded in that question is the assumption that a lot of people have in Yemen that would push back against what we've heard on the panel today, is that the U.S. just doesn't have sort of a trustworthy partner on the ground to work with. And so when I've talked, and I'm sure you and many of the people either listening or speaking on this panel have heard as well, is the U.S. concerned that the bombing campaign could go on indefinitely without much real impact on the ground. So how long do we need to get a ground offensive to actually defeat the Houthis?
Right. I've probably got a particular view on this, and it'll be a little bit different from most people. That's because I really eat, sleep, and breathe Yemeni armed force capability and how it interacts with the US. And that's what, this trilogy of books about the Yemen war has been about, is let me put it this way. The US didn't think it had a capable enough partner in the UAE. So the US never thinks its partner is capable enough. That's point number one. And they were wrong about the UAE. And they'd probably be wrong about the Yemen forces too. If you look at the 2022 operation in Marib, where the Houthis lost, over a year's worth of territorial gains in 2 weeks, you can see that, supported with some air power, Amalika and some other high-quality forces can take terrain from the Houthis, even foothill/mountain terrain. So, the fact is, I personally think it's the other way around. This 50-day thing was way longer than it would have taken to get some ground operations moving. Doing a standoff strategic air campaign, you heard the reporting saying that it was planned to take between 240 and 320 days or something. That's not how quick a ground campaign could have started. The ground campaign could have started very quickly because it's not a sophisticated ground campaign. It's just moving forward while the US bombs the hell out of what's on the other side of the front line. And it doesn't have to be a high quality advance to do that. So, generally speaking, it's going to move in fits and spurts. You're going to activate your force in Yemen. It's going to do about 2 weeks, 3 weeks worth of operations. And then it's going to break for a while where it rebuilds itself. And then it's going to happen again in a month or two's time. But it's not like, the invasion of Normandy. This doesn't require a lot of organization. Those forces already exist. It's just a case of paying them, which is not that hard, giving them some ammunition, giving them some air support, and setting them off for a little while. I think the key problem here is the US could have done that easy. I can't help but feel at least Saudi Arabia and possibly other Gulf states restrained that from happening, because they knew that kind of escalation would have resulted in missiles hitting the GCC homeland.
Okay, Shurooq, I want to turn to you. I want to bring in some of our audience Q&A, which many of them have sort of hit on the same theme, which I think builds on what exactly it is that Michael was talking about. So there are a couple of components to this question. One is sort of the Saudi UAE involvement. Shurooq, earlier you had told us that Yemen has an internationally recognized government. Some refer to it as the legitimate government of Yemen. But this is a government that really was formed in 2022 by Saudi Arabia Arabia, by the UAE, forcing President Hadi out. And now within the Presidential Leadership Council, there are significant divisions. There are divisions between the Southern Transitional Council, which advocates for an independent southern state. There are divisions with Islah, which has members on the Presidential Leadership Council. We've seen in the past armed units affiliated with the STC, the Southern Transitional Council, actually come into armed conflict with armed units who are more loyal to Islah. And so the question for you, I think, is, given these divisions that exist within the internationally recognized government of Yemen, within the Presidential Leadership Council, how can the U.S. or outside actors actually hope to have them speaking with some sort of a unified voice? Michael said that a ground campaign could start relatively quickly. The U.S. carried out bombing campaign for 52 days, and there was no ground offensive to speak of. Is this because of internal divisions, or are these divisions really what is going to sow the seed of defeat and allow the Houthis to become even more powerful than they are today? So there's a lot there, but if you could sort of unpack for us, whether the government is legitimate and what these divisions within the Presidential Leadership Council actually mean for an anti-Houthi coalition in Yemen.
This is not an easy question because, and again, I don't think this is a bad thing when we say it's complicated, because it's complicated and it requires complicated answers. But first, I would like to highlight something I think we forgot while, focusing on assessment, is that there is a very important dimension into this conflict, which is not a sideline point, which is Houthis' supremacist ideology, which no matter how divided the anti-Houthi are, groups are, Yemenis agree on not accepting this supremacist ideology. And I think this is where we have to build on. I also think people, when they deal with policy questions regarding Yemen, we suddenly act as if human history started yesterday and we don't know what to do. But if we take a second and just think about the English appeasement policy toward Nazis, that is it. That is it. Was that the answer? Was it the best solution to avoid human cost? Was there any way around defeating this group that sees itself better than everyone? I understand that it's different. We have multi-layered considerations here, but focusing on, and also the timing of what to focus on at a specific moment, I think it's also a way of avoiding accountability, because we've seen that in every stage of this conflict, where there was a serious attempt to defeat Houthis, those fractions were on the same side. They are divided, and they fight interest, and they have harmed the legitimacy and this fight so bad. But that is not the problem here. The problem here is, and that will be a problem later when we are dealing with governance, with services, with later stages of governance. But while we're here fighting Houthis, I think they're all on the same page.
So let me follow up on that, Shurooq. If they are all on the same page, and if ground campaigns are fairly easy to get started, why did we not see one between March 15th and May 6th? Why did the STC not make advances against the Houthis? Why did not other members of the internationally recognized government of Yemen say, this is our chance? We can actually do to the Houthis what it is that we're done to ISIS.
Yeah, it's sad because they are weak. They don't have the capabilities, and they have tried moving without international coverage, and they were attacked while doing so. That's why a coherent strategy between the US and the regional powers has to be, they have to agree on that. And I think Mutea will be better suited to answer this question. Am I mistaken that, right?
Okay, well, let's turn to Mutea. Why don't you pick up
me.
on the same question? Why did we not see a ground offensive from the Yemeni government, from the Presidential Leadership Council? Is this a result of the divisions within the different groups on the PLC?
Let me see it clear. You cannot start this war under the campaign of the United States if you don't have an agreement with the United States. The United States start this campaign. We contact the United States. We have a very serious talk, and we heard a very great promises, and they were talking about this campaign will not be ended even if the Houthis stop attacking the navigation, even if the Houthis did everything, if the Houthis stop attacking Israel, if the Houthis, we heard all this talk. I mean, it's the same thing. We are ready to have this word. We need this word. And just to remember, since 2019, when we were about to take Hodeidah, and since 2022, since the truce, the international was the reason why we stopped any kind of the war. And now we tried many times, and we have a great talk. There is a lot of secrets. Maybe you will read it in the future about how the talk that just maybe 24 hours before the suspension, we were talking with officials in the United States, and they were talking in a different way. I mean, it's clear. You do not need to blame us about the lack of the strategy of the United States. And it is also, again, we should know when the United States and the international national start targeting Al-Qaeda and ISIS, they were saying if the Al-Qaeda have the chemical weapons, they will use it against the people. And you are seeing now Houthi will use any kind of weapon they have, but it's now the target is the navigation and the regional countries, not us. For many years, the Houthi was using these weapons against us, and every time we were talking about the necessity to bring back every city, Sana'a and every other city under the rule of the law, the rule of the government itself, we heard something else. Let me just one sentence. The crisis, the humanitarian crisis, is a very bad in Yemen. That the worst thing in Yemen is Houthi. The way he is repressing people, the way he is killing the hope, the way he is depriving us from the basic rights, the way he is taking our own things, our own salaries, our own properties. This is the thing. We are not here because there is a humanitarian crisis. There is a human crisis because of what the Houthi is doing to Yemen. We are not here because we choose this war. We tried until the last moment. Hamzah and I were in the national dialogue. We did everything to make the peace is the choice of Yemen. But when there is one group choose this war, we find ourselves in this war. And from the first moment, like Shurooq said, we are talking about fascism. We are talking about those they think they are better than us because they are from a different race or from they are the son of gods, and they do not accept. It's we never. And I need to say one thing. I always feel there is a sense of admiration to the capability of the Houthis. But let me say one thing. The capability, the great behavior, the great deal or way of this dictatorship or fascism is something to fear, not to admire. The stronger the fascism is, the greater the risk that we have. And you can see it. Every time the Houthis is getting stronger, the problem is bigger. Yesterday for Yemenis only, now it's for the international community.
Thank you for that, Mutea. Shurooq, I want to come to you very briefly. I know you want to make a quick intervention very quickly. Then I'm going to go to Hamzah. We have, I think, a very good question for you in the chat. And then I'm going to come back to Michael to sort of put this in a broader regional context. And then I think we'll dive down. But we have about 15 to 20 minutes left. So Shurooq, if you want to make your comment, and then I'll come to Hamzah with a question.
Just in seconds, I don't want to appear like if I am defending the government or the legitimate government. I'm just being realistic as someone who's concerned with human rights. I don't see any safeguards for our rights and our future other than supporting our government, at least no matter how corrupted they are. They believe that we are equal human beings. Just one other thing I think that we need to think about is there is a deep structural issue with the legitimate government and the way they think. They have heavily dependent on international given legitimacy, and they have forgotten how they need their legitimacy to be perceived too by people on the ground. And unlike the legitimate government, the Houthis have worked very strategically with this. The way they control, the way they create an illusion of function, the way they create an illusion of institutionalization of their governance. And it was very disappointing for me and for many Yemenis that the government did not do thing during this campaign. And what was more sad, that we've heard different separate messages from these fractions directly communicating with the US as, I mean, just showing how ready they are to fight on the ground, but aren't they supposed to have their own way of communicating as a government? They undermine their legitimacy every day, but that is not a thing to hold against them and compare them with the Houthis or hold them at the same level. Because at the end of the day, this is a state and this is an ideological armed group that does not believe in basic human rights, and they are fascist. Thank you.
Okay, let me turn to Hamzah. We have one of the questions in sort of our comment is basically saying the U.S., for all the strikes that it carried out, and we've said this a number of times in our panel today, 1,100 strikes over the course of 52 days. The jury, I think, is still out on how much actual damage was done to the Houthis. We didn't kill Abd al-Malik al-Houthi. We didn't destroy their capacity or their capabilities. They certainly suffered a number of setbacks, had underground facilities destroyed, but they're still firing missiles. In fact, since May 6th, they've fired missiles into Israel. So given that, that's point A. Point B would be that the U.S. is concerned about the entire globe. The U.S. is in an era of strategic competition where it's looking at what's happening with Russia. It's looking at what's happening with China, with the People's Republic of China. It's concerned about a Taiwan scenario. We saw, I think there was reporting in the New York Times that said Pentagon planners were worried that the United States was utilizing so many standoff munitions it would need in a future conflict in Taiwan, that planners were getting concerned that U.S. weapon storage was dropping to dangerously low rates. So given that the U.S. didn't make really much of a dent on the Houthis, given the cost to munitions and the cost in dollars, and then given the third point, the fact that there was no ground campaign, as Shurooq and Mutea have just spoken about. Hamzah, earlier you said the Houthis have to be defeated in order to remove this threat. If those three things are true, that the U.S. didn't do significant enough damage to deter the Houthis, that the cost to the U.S. was quite high, particularly when you think about all the other risks that the U.S. has to manage in the world, and given the divisions in the local government there in Yemen, why should the U.S. get back involved in attempting to defeat the Houthis?
Well, thank you so much, Greg, for this wide question that I have to answer a different aspect of. Well, we live in a dilemma. Saudi Arabia was supporting the government for 7 years, while the United States were not okay with defeating the Houthis. Now, the United States want to defeat the Houthis, while Saudi Arabia is not. What a great luck do we have in Yemen. Both the international and regional partners are not on the same page. We are being, as I said before, and you have heard Mr. Mutea speaking, like 1 day before the halting of the strikes, we were speaking at high-level coordination. What does this supposed to mean? There is no strategy in Yemen. And I've seen it. I have been here. Institution, Department of the State, Department of Defense specifically, were pushing towards a ground operation. Who stopped that? The White House. And does the White House decide the policy? No, it's all about being better than Biden. It's not about mitigating the risk. It's not about thinking them about the risk. We have been annihilating the Houthis at the first place. Then we have seen only freedom of navigation. There was a conflicting statements from the Secretary of Defense, Secretary of the State, from the President, from Witkoff, and they ended up halting the campaign in 1 day because the Iranian pushed for that, because the Iranian believed that their asset, which is the peace talks with Americans, are more important than anything else. And the Houthi obeyed. It's clearly. And when it comes to Houthis, and to be honest, and I have to say that the United States, the regional allies, has lost confidence in the United States. And to solve this issue, you cannot, and they believe so, because they have invited the Saudis to here. They have talked with the Emiratis, but they cannot do anything on the ground without the help of the Saudis. And unfortunately, the United States had abandoned the Yemeni government into a level that it cannot be, from their point of view, a good partner, because they left, they give the file to the Saudis and they say, take care of it. We don't care, whatever you want, but don't kill the Houthis to the end. And we have this. They abandoned Yemen. They see Yemen as a secondary file to the regional files. And this is a big problem. Yemen has been, as Mr. Mutea said, a great partner for the United States, but they abandoned Yemen, and we are like paying the trade-off for that. That's why I believe that building confidence, building trust with the regional power is the first step. Realizing that the Houthi risk and threat is something that should be managed is the second thing. The third thing, Greg, Houthis are defeatable. We have never tried to have an actual real war with Houthis during the last 10 years. Every battle that was really, like I would say, designed, that was really prepared for, Houthis were beaten and they lost. There was no real battle with the Houthis. And to be honest, we have given these many chances, but we didn't give like a real conflict, a real battle, a chance. And we've seen that. I have been involved with that. Houthis will never go to any peace talks. And the Saudis, like the regional power, have given them the last 3 years all what they want. They get rid of Hadi. They brought the PLC, which is fragile, conflicting. They give them Sana'a Airport. They open the restrictions on Hodeidah. What the Houthis want more, they will ask for more, they will do for more. Every time you appease them, you give them concessions, they will ask for more. They will hunger for more. And for them, it's a tactic. They want to control all over Yemen, which is 50 times bigger than Lebanon, with 30 million people. Houthis are more than just at Hezbollah. And if they control Yemen, they will be a headache to the whole world. And if we don't realize that, if we think that, oh, I won the war because I was better than Biden, then America will lose in the long run. And it is a short-sightedness that will backfire, and they will feel sorry for, as they felt sorry the first moment they attacked Israel and they attacked navigation.
Thank you for that, Hamzah. Michael, I want to come to you just really briefly. We have about 10 minutes, so I'm going to ask you to try to keep your remarks to about 2 or 3 minutes, and then we'll go around the screen for sort of final remarks on a couple of targeted questions. But Michael, really briefly, we've talked a lot about sort of the military aspect. The ceasefire that was agreed to seemed to be, there was short-term benefits for both sides. President Trump was about to embark on a trip to the Middle East. He was involved, obviously the U.S. is involved in negotiations with Iran over potentially a new nuclear deal. The Houthis seem to want sort of a short-term reprieve from U.S. bombing. So I'm hoping you could put it into the regional context, this ceasefire, and what happens next, particularly building on your earlier comment that the United States has basically handed Yemen over to Saudi Arabia, which I think you termed as sort of a regional manager. So what comes next in sort of this regional conflict, and how, when Saudi Arabia is eager to sort of exit the war, how are they going to be in charge there with the Houthis?
Yeah, thanks very much. So first of all, I'm so impressed with all the presentations today, and boy, are you guys eloquent and passionate. I've really enjoyed this. The problem in Yemen is always the backseat drivers, right? They don't let you drive. You know, if you're the UAE and Yemenis and you're nearly winning at Hodeidah, the US doesn't let you drive. The UN doesn't let you drive. Now, if you're the US and some Yemenis and you want to get on with a ground offensive, probably the Trump administration or the Trump White House and the Saudis don't let you drive. So, you know, these are the problems. The problems are always international. You know, Yemen is a complicated place, but they can get some stuff done with a minimal amount of help, and then with people staying out of the way. But nobody ever stays out of the way. They either want to have nothing to do with the country, but then somehow they want to also affect the details of what's happening as well. So what I would say is this, you know, one question you asked earlier is what would make the US get back in? It's very simple, because the Gulf and to some extent Israel will ask them to go back in, because conditions will change. Maybe the US-Iran talks will break down, things will get more hectic on that front. And at some point, the Gulf will say, we are now ready to have a tough max pressure campaign on the Houthis in various dimensions. But, you know, just to say that the problem with the PLC is it had zero agency. It was built to have zero Yemeni agency, because unfortunately, you know, for all of their strengths, most of these guys live in Saudi Arabia and the UAE, and they're going to do whatever they're told. You know, that's the reality. So if Saudi doesn't want a ground operation, there isn't going to be one. And the loss of Yemeni agency is very deliberate on the Gulf states, by the Gulf states. Very deliberate. You know, and the building of the PLC and of the National Shield Forces is very deliberate. It's there to try and create less local agency, more external agency in the country. And the Houthis are the strongest right now in terms of the leverage they have over the Gulf. So ultimately, going forward, this gets to your point, Greg, the Gulf is the center of gravity for a counter-Houthi campaign. It's not America, and it's not Aden, and it's not Mara. It's Saudi Arabia. The decision to unseat the Houthis can only come from there. Over.
Thank you very much. Mutea, I'm going to go to you, ask you a question. If you could keep your remarks just to about a minute, minute and a half, which is probably impossible given the question I'm about to ask, but I trust you to do your best. So Houthis are firing missiles at Israel. Israel's firing missiles back. My question is, we've talked a lot about sort of an air component with a ground campaign. Could Israel provide the air cover for some sort of local Yemeni PLC, recognized government of Yemen ground campaign? In other words, could Israel do in partnership with the Yemeni government on the ground, or is that a non-starter for the Yemeni government?
I think this is impossible. Israel has another war. It's not our war at all. And we know what Israel knows. Israel could just destroy Gaza, killing innocent, and will do the same to Yemen. Israel and Houthis are the same fabric, and they are in another life. They will be twins. For us, we have our own war. It's under the international law. We have our rights. we have our people, and I think we know who will be our allies in this war.
Thank you very much. Shurooq, I'm going to come to you, and then Hamzah, I'm going to give you the last word. So Shurooq, just really quickly, it appears the U.S. doesn't want to be involved in Yemen. The U.S. has stopped its bombing campaign. Saudi Arabia and the UAE have been involved for a long time, but both are, A, they have divisions about what they'd like to see in Yemen, and then B, both appear to be sort of tired of this war that they've been involved since 2015. And then you have the PLC, which we've talked about on the ground, which has divisions of its own. So you have an international partner that wants out. You have regional partners that are looking to get out. Perhaps, as Michael said, the dynamic changes. You have a divided group on the ground. And then you have the Houthis, who appear very, very united. So, and they want the same thing and are able to speak with one voice, or at least that's the image they present. So given those fractures on sort of the anti-Houthi side, is there anything that would change the dynamic to sort of paper over some of those and allow them to actually confront the Houthis with the totality of all their power, from the US through Saudi Arabia, through the UAE and the PLC? Or are these divisions simply unbridgeable? And I'll give you about a minute and a half for that. Sorry. A broad question and a very short answer.
And it's a very short answer indeed. The answer to this is the Houthi threat. It's what will make them go beyond their divisions. I always say that whenever I fear that we will be forgotten and left alone with the Houthis, I remember who are the Houthis. And they will go back again and attack everyone who thinks that they can broke an agreement with them. That's it. That's the answer. Houthis, the moment all these fractions realize the risk, and there is no way countries can live in isolation, and Yemenis will not left alone, this is a laughable belief. What we need is a policy that centers Yemenis in terms of more than just our survival. We need our dream and ambitions realized. And Greg, if Yemenis are not safe, no one is safe.
Very good on keeping to time. Hamzah, the last word is going to be yours. I think, unless I'm mistaken, that everyone on the panel sort of agrees that this is not the end of the war, but this is rather a pause, and the war has sort of changed and morphed a little bit. So my question to you, and you have about 2 to 2.5 minutes, is A, what comes next in this war? What's going to happen? What should we be looking for over the next couple of months? And then B, this has been, as many conversations on Yemen are, a very sort of pessimistic conversation. Is there any reason for hope? Is there any optimistic note on which we can end? So those are the two things. What happens next? And then is there something that we can hang our hats on to be hopeful for the future?
I think nobody can tell you what will happen tomorrow in Yemen. Whenever somebody starts to telling you that, he knows nothing about Yemen. That's the first thing. The second thing, and I think I agree with what the distinguished speakers have said, that Houthis will force people to do that. But the most important thing is that what I've been this whole session and discussion about is the lack of the US strategy and policy will consume money, consume effort, and consume blood on the ground. For Yemenis, which I believe and I think they have started fighting the Houthis long time ago, before the Saudi intervention, before the United States intervention, before this administration, and after this administration, they will keep fighting the Houthis. They cannot live with somebody who believes that he is the son of God and he has the divine right to rule the people. He thinks that he's better than you. He thinks he doesn't believe in democracy, doesn't believe in equality. So you cannot live. There's no common ground. You cannot find a common ground. Either you accept that you become a slave, or he accept not, which will not happen, and which I haven't seen it. The only, or I will say, the outcome of what happened during the last 2 years was clearly Houthi has gained some Arab countries' propaganda, but the Yemenis themselves know the Houthi very well, Greg, and I think you have conversations with Yemenis. They cannot be manipulated by the Gaza slogan, Gaza cause. I think what's new right now is the change in the international community observance of the Houthis. And this will change, and this will keep building upon. And I think eventually this conflict must end when we have a demilitarized Houthis. And this will not happen by peace talks. This will probably happen by a fight that will bring Houthis to become humans, not to change the Yemeni to become slaves.
Okay, I think we'll leave it there. I want to thank all the panelists for what I think was a really great conversation. There's so much to get into. Obviously, a lot is changing. Thank the Arab Gulf States Institute in Washington for hosting this, and Hamzah yourself for organizing the panel. And of course, to all the viewers online, we really appreciate your attention and as well as your questions. So thanks to everyone.